guys, it's Cherish from the Motley News, and I'm here today to introduce you to an awesome writer that I got acquainted with about 6 years ago. Her name is Tanuja Desai Hidier, and she is the author of Born Confused, and her latest book, Bombay Blues, came out just a year ago. So we're going to talk to Tanuja.
Hello. Hi, Cherish. Happy New Year, everybody.
Woo! Um, Tanuja, you do so many things. This is one of like the complicated things about researching you before talking to you. Like, just why don't you just list off all the things that you do on that's gotten you to writing?
Okay, well, things always sound busier on the internet, so let me
Yeah.
just say that first. But the path that got me to writing, I mean, if you mean sort of the jobs I had and all before writing my first book, Born Confused, um, wow. Well, first let me say I turned avoiding writing a novel into a full-time career the entire time I was living in New York. I think I always knew I wanted to write, and then I kind of got out of university, moved to New York, and you know, was completely exhilarated and had a complete kind of uh, insecurity attack as well, and just felt like I had no idea what I was doing in the city, on the planet, all those big questions. And I ended up, gosh, I had so many different jobs. I interned at the Paris Review, which is a literary magazine while I was there. George Plimpton was the editor, and that was a great experience. And one of the kind of highlights of that experience was, this was in the days where actual physical copies of manuscripts were submitted, and there was something called the slush pile, which was all the unsolicited manuscripts.
Oh, I know about the
Oh,
slush.
the slush pile. And, it was a little dispiriting to, as someone who was thinking I wanted to write stories and submit them to places, to sort of see the slush pile, like literally blocking the light from the windows. It was so high. And the interns, we were kind of, the lowest on the ladder. We were treated very well, but, we were kind of down there. But we were the ones in charge of going through the slush pile and figuring out what to pass on to like the editors higher up. And we actually had this one great experience while I was there. I was there for a year, and there was a story that was, completely buried in the slush pile by a completely unknown author. And we managed, there was a whole kind of, a big buzz started amongst all the interns, and we managed to actually get it up the ladder, and it actually got into the Paris Review. So that was quite exciting.
Whoa.
The parties were really fun.
Yeah.
At, and what else did I do? So I also worked as a secretary in the film and video department of the Whitney Museum, which was kind of unfortunate for my coworkers, because I was I would get very distracted and start reading. The curator of the film and video department subscribed to Granta, and I had never seen Granta before, and I had to sort through the mail and kind of deliver it to the right people, and then I would get completely caught up reading the stories in Granta and lose track of the actual job I was supposed to be doing. But
Oh no.
they were very nice people, and that was a great experience, because I also got exposed to sort of film and video installations, and this whole kind of area in art that I didn't really know very much about. And I was a hostess in a Tex-Mex restaurant called the Blue Moon. I walked a dog. There was this white Saluki dog, an all-white dog. I didn't realize that they're kind of one of the fastest breeds of dog in the world. And I was walking the dog for the owner, and in Central Park, it was a beautiful sunny day. And I thought, wow, I'm young in New York City. Anything is possible. We're all free to be who we want to be. This dog should have a nice little run on this beautiful day. And I let her name was Cleopatra. I let her off her leash for a minute, and like, boom, she was a dot in the distance. And I spent like that entire, kind of session chasing this mythical looking creature going high speed through Central Park, desperately trying to catch it and, bring it back to its owner, which I managed to do. Copy editing. I did some kind of editing and magazine writing, but I got into copy editing because I wanted to be able to get enough work freelance. And at that time, there was quite a lot of copy editing work at different magazines in New York. And I thought freelance meant that I would be free to, write my book and do other stuff. But it ended up being all Lance and not very free. And but all those things, I think now I can kind of see the the path was informational, though I couldn't see it at all at the time. Like, for example, at the Tex-Mex restaurant, I met another waitress who is an aspiring writer, and she really recommended that I take a fiction writing workshop at a place called the Writer's Voice, these creative writing courses at the Y in New York. And I did, and that actually, a huge kind of shift and epiphany happened in my writing. This is going to sound very but I was writing a series of connected short stories in the workshop at the Writer's Voice, and literally, like overnight, my white female protagonist, Amy from Ohio, became Indian American when a few fellow workshoppers, there was like this one session where they said, we don't understand, it's very clear that you're writing this character. This character has a sort of outsider point of view, and why is she even white? And, they said it was very clear that she was from some other kind of culture and some kind of, on the fringe kind of vantage point. And then somebody said, why don't you just make her Indian? And it had never occurred to me, actually, to make my own character Indian American. And what's amazing is literally with just a little bit of like find and replace and very few other changes, I changed this character from Amy from Ohio to Kayla, I think from Massachusetts. And it required little other revision. And then suddenly the stories like started to hang together in a much better fashion, and things made sense that hadn't made sense before. So, that wouldn't have happened if I weren't at the Tex-Mex restaurant. And eventually, like in Born Confused, I think all these experiences, find their way into whatever you're doing, because we carry our entire story with us, into whatever we do, whatever relationship, work, conversation, interaction. And so even things like the owner of the Saluki, her bedroom was the basis for the bedroom of Gwen Sexton's mother's bedroom in Born Confused, the all-white bedroom with the white bedspreads.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was an all-white dog. No, there isn't an all-white dog in the book, but that's the bedroom I was picturing. So
all of it just comes together.
Yes, I think it does.
Whether you realize it or not.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't know it at the time, but I would say, I think if you have some kind of intention, whatever it might be, I'm not really sure what word to use. I think because I knew I wanted to write at some point, even though I didn't fully believe I was going to get there or knew what my story was, but I think on some level that was operating in my system and piecing things together, maybe subconsciously as kind of time went on. But I would say do not lose faith, because the years when I was, the most confused and lost in New York City ended up being the very years I drew from to write about those emotions and to write a coming of age story, which is, all of us are always coming of age. And I think that this whole kind of quest to shape our identities and find our path and, put meaning into what we do and what others do in relationships, and, as you evolve, what happens to relationships, as they evolve, what happens, etc. That's always happening in life. And you're always taking part in it, so if you're going to write, you're actually in the middle of your story, even as we speak.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went on for a little while, but
that's fine. And all of that makes, so much sense. I think we all get really tied up in when is it going to happen?
Yeah.
Why haven't I done X, Y, or Z? And you just, not to sound super mystical or anything, but you just never know what's happening that's outside of your watch.
Absolutely.
Or outside of your consciousness, I guess.
Absolutely.
Which I wanted to talk about Dimple, your protagonist. Dimple Lala is basically me, that age. And
At last I meet you.
Well, I think that's the wonderful thing about her. She has her own complex ABCD upbringing, but I think she's a universal character, and that whole coming of age, I don't know, that storyline where we're just trying to find ourselves. She's not too different from, the next young teenager. I mean, I came home drunk and wondered, like, are my parents gonna know?
That part was completely fictitious, by the way.
Okay. But I mean, that doesn't mean that it hasn't happened to like a million other teenagers.
Yeah, and I was kidding, but go on.
Oh. I don't know. Did you know back then, and you may not have had the hindsight, like how important Dimple was, like why America needed her.
God, it's been
Um,
amazing to see that her story has resonated so much. I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know. I think I was so excited. I actually sold the story before I wrote it based on a proposal. And that whole, actually, this was another, when I was in New York, as part of my avoiding of writing my novel, I started to, sing in bands and do a lot of music stuff. And
yeah.
the violinist in the punk pop band I was in at the time, a band called IO, and I still do a lot of my songwriting with Adam Fellows, who's from IO. She organized a bunch of people to go see Fiona Apple play at Roseland, and that night I ended up meeting David Levithan, who would become my editor on both of my books, and we connected. We just connected over music, really. And later I went to see him about. I was actually looking into copy editing work before I was moving to London, and he understood that I was there to pitch a book, which actually wasn't why I was there, but in the end, that's what I did. And it came about that way. So I had a deadline. So basically, Scholastic bought a very detailed proposal that I wrote. I knew I wanted to write a South Asian American coming of age story, and then I kind of fleshed that out in more detail once I got to London. Um, and then I had a deadline in place because it had already sold. And then I was just so excited that somebody wanted to read something, that I was going to read this story. There was somebody waiting for it. And I can say that, although I really honestly never thought about what was going to happen once it came out, I was just completely immersed in, writing the story. And it was a really, really joyful experience. I mean, that's not to say there weren't, there was immense sleep deprivation, and it was stressful whenever like the mini deadlines would come up and I'd miss them, etc. But it was really joyful, and I feel like that joy is in the book, even through maybe the tougher times that Dimple experiences, because it came from a very. People ask me how long it took to write that book. I mean, it took 4 months to write the first draft, 5 months to revise it, but it took my whole life to write that book. Every short story I wrote before. All of those years of, sitting around in cafes with notebooks, writing down ideas that didn't hang together, I can see the path now, that was all the work that needed to be done, and all the getting lost and confusion, all of that was, so it took my whole life basically to write this. For me, I wanted to tell this story. I wanted to also fill a hole on my childhood bookshelf with a story with characters who looked more like the people in my own home, because when I was growing up, we were the first brown, well, this particular shade of brown, we were the first, South Asians in my town. My parents were the first from both sides of their families to come to the USA. There were 2 African American families and us basically, and later there were a couple other South Asian American families. But there were no people of our particular color on TV, in the pages of magazines, on movie screens, or in the books I was reading, actually, which now, makes me think maybe that's why later it didn't occur to me I could make Amy brown rather than white, I mean, I don't know. Who knows? Because if I had seen those characters at an earlier age, maybe that would have seemed like a possibility. So that hole was something I think I wanted to later fill. And when I was in New York, I also discovered the South Asian kind of first-generation American arts and music scene there almost overnight as well. I did a short film that had an Indian American protagonist, and it ended up playing a festival circuit there. And some of the festivals it played were like Asian American film festivals, South Asian American, etc. And that was really exciting. That's it was in the late 90s, and it was a moment when the subculture was really becoming culture. South Asian studies departments were taking off. We had the birth of the South Asian Women's Creative Collective, the South Asian Journalists Association, and parties like Basement Bhangra, DJ Rekha's Basement Bhangra, which is still going strong now in 2015, started in 1997. And it was a really exhilarating eye and ear opening moment to live in. You could tangibly feel kind of the culture on the rise and being shaped and reshaped and remade. And so I also wanted to pay homage to that whole scene. I'm calling it a scene, but it's more than a scene. It was like
a movement.
Yeah. And this term, American Born Confused Desai, which is a term that South Asians in South Asia have to describe, we children of the diaspora who don't know where we're from. these people I was meeting didn't seem very confused to me. I mean, I still was, dealing with my own. I was probably confused at why they didn't seem confused.
Yeah.
And in the book, I wanted to redefine that C for confused into one for creative, because that seemed like a more accurate description of what was going on at the time, and in general of what we all are, and what you can do with confusion. You can turn it into something that is a creative act. And confusion is not a bad thing. It makes you reassess, question things. It makes you reinvent. And I think it's not even a step away from creativity. It's part and parcel of the same space.
I agree. I think when you have not too tight a hold of your identity,
Yeah.
you start incorporating interesting things to, I don't know, cobble together something that is yourself, and that's a creative process.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we're hopefully all still in the process of doing that. Hopefully you don't know yourself too completely just yet.
No, I think I agree.
This book, and I was just like, oh my gosh, the characters are so well written. You've got a haphazardly put together young woman who's just kind of like, I want to be like my white friend Gwen, who has all the boys and all the clothes. You've got overprotective parents who are just like, hey, you're not doing the best job of learning your own culture, and we're going to be in your face about it all the time. And her best friend, and I say, best friend, Gwen,
Yeah.
was somebody that I really took to in a weird way, because I found myself wondering, like, am I sometimes Gwen? This young white woman who is so enamored by other cultures to the point of exoticizing them.
Yeah.
And, when I discovered Southeast Asian culture, I was just like all about, what if I got scarves? What if I got bindi? What if I did henna? Well, and
it's true. Yeah.
and nowadays you kind of hear a lot about misappropriation, and how unfortunately some people take that stuff, take little snippets of a culture and kind of run with it. I was going to ask you, Gwen is such an interesting and powerful character that shapes Dimple's psyche. Have you yourself ran into a few Gwens, and if so, how have you dealt with them?
I think I don't know that I ever thought I had to deal with them, although obviously I was compelled to write one.
Yeah.
I think one muse for Gwen, I mean, Gwen is a mix of a lot of things, and, lots of them made up, but a muse for Gwen was definitely Gwen Stefani. And at that time, when I was kind of discovering the South Asian arts, music, first generation American scene, that was precisely when No Doubt
was discovering it.
Yeah. So Gwen Stefani was in her Bindi phase, and No Doubt and Don't Speak was this big hit, and she a lot of people in this kind of again, this kind of South Asian circle, like, these who we'd be debating culture by day at NYU. I didn't go to NYU, but I was kind of at those things, and then throwing it down at Basement Bunker at night. A lot of people were pretty outraged, although I'm sure they were humming along every time Don't Speak came on the radio. And I found I couldn't get angry. I feel like I even tried to get angry, and I couldn't get angry about it. And I like Gwen Stefani. I liked that Gwen at that moment in time. I haven't been following her stuff recently, but I like her. And I think also, Tony Kanal, the bass player in the band, is Indian American, and they were together. They're still very close. And so even though a lot of people got upset, I felt like she actually had a true connection to the culture. She dearly loved somebody who was part of that culture. They grew up together. They made music together. And I don't know, and so there's some of that, I think, in Gwen Sexton, because I feel like she might be clumsy and in her way of kind of navigating things or expressing her excitement, but I feel like her intentions are never to harm or to do anything negative in that sense. And I feel like I feel like her curiosity comes from a place of love. And
Yeah.
she really wants, Dimple wants everything she has, she thinks. But Gwen really wants everything Dimple has. Gwen wants a family, she wants a nest, she wants roots, she wants to feel part of something with a history and part of something that will protect her as she goes forward into her future. And I really feel for that. I feel very protective of Gwen. I feel like she genuinely, genuinely loves Dimple. And, both of them have kind of hurt each other not so intentionally in this process of this friendship sort of evolving. And I think especially in a very politically correct age, it's ever more important, or it's always important to examine the intention of the person, the heart of the person, and not just their vocabulary when we come to kind of things like appropriation, etc. I mean, there's obviously some vocabulary that's not acceptable in any situation,
Yeah.
but other types of politically correct vocabulary are purchased at a very expensive price, right? It's from a certain kind of education, being able to move in certain circles. I know books and things are available to lots of people, but it's also part of a kind of university, collegiate, a certain kind of culture. And if somebody doesn't have those exact words, but is expressing something that is, is purely felt and not with kind of, evil intention, I think
Right.
they should have space for that. And, I think a character like Gwyn is possibly far more open-minded about South Asian culture than a South Asian character such as Upma, who's viewing everything through a lens, the distorting lens of anger.
Right.
Because once you're kind of, using that as a framework, nothing is clear. Everything is kind of fuzzed out by that emotion. So, yeah.